pressure. I think about them.
Right. Everybody who's watching this is the very first of an interview series that for now, my working title is Interviews with Friends and Fans, because they're people that started out as fans of mine and became friends through the process somehow. And Mike Russell is a person who's somehow followed a lot of my career. And recently, when I launched the Cocktails with Joey 25th anniversary pack, there was a whole little special bonus thing where we did a really cool Zoom Q&A session with people that were part of the production, the musicians, the engineer, Bob Wayne, and anyone who had purchased the thing that could ask questions. So we sent out an email blast to the people saying, hey, if you have questions beforehand or can't make it to the actual thing, it'll be recorded. So ask questions. So Mike Russell was one of the couple people that sent me questions, and a lot of them, and a lot of really great, pertinent questions. And I was thinking, this could constitute its own interview unto itself. It's that, thorough in what the types of questions are. And so it gave me an idea for my YouTube channel to do like a monthly installation where it's more of a good conversation / interview, and maybe I'll have a few questions for you. So that's where we'll start with this. And thanks so much for coming to this and being part of it. The very first one. Let's see where it goes. Let's see how interesting or boring we are.
No, this is great. I got to tell you, by the way, this is a free ad for the Joey Altruda Special Cocktails experience, because that Zoom call was really fun to watch. I thoroughly enjoyed seeing all those musicians. Like, I'd asked you about that flute solo in a Martini for Mancini, and then he shows up, and it was like, oh, it was really fascinating to get answers to questions in like this very intimate setting, as intimate as Zoom can be, with all the people who had actually made the album. It was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
There he was on the Zoom with us to tell you about it. And I just basically ran it down. Like, Artie Webb is a guy who has vocabulary on par of a John Coltrane. He could keep you engaged with the story for 10, 15, 20 minutes in a solo and never make you feel bored or like he's repeating himself.
Yeah.
So like, having him do like, and I had played with him for so long by the time I made that album that like I said, it was like, oh, 3 choruses on that Martini for Mancini was like a free sample of what he does. I didn't want to let it go any longer than that because, the songs on that album are really made to be like a statement. Mm-hmm. And they're for non-jazz listeners. They're for jazz listeners, but they're for non-jazz listeners, if that makes sense.
It actually does. A good friend of mine, former editor of the DVD Journal, is also a big fan of Cocktails with Joey. Still plays it like at parties that he has at his work, and one of the things that he said about it, why he's such a big fan of it, is that it's an interesting album because it does live in that in-between place. It's a jazz album, but it has really pop hooks in it almost. Like, it's a very, does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's really deliberate hooks. It's extremely engaging on just a pure entertainment level, and can be easily digested by people with a very poor musical education like myself. So, it's or not poor musical education, but a limited musical vocabulary.
I understand what you mean. I came up as a record collector since I was 6. So part of that album is, an element is, part of it is like, if you were to find this album, or when you find an album at a thrift shop, what is it that you love about the album? You love the fact that you could listen to the whole album front to back and never skip a song. You love the sequence of the songs, mm-hmm. and the pace of the album. You love the design of the record label. You love the sound of the audio quality. You love the sound of, or like maybe the record cover draws you in. So like all of these things, like when we were record buyers, like you know, that experience, even CDs, you bought something based on the cover. You didn't even know what it was going to sound like, but you were like, this looks really good.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Or as a record collector, I've had records with really boring, bland record covers designs. And the music is super good, but psychologically, it never makes me want to pull it off of the shelf as often as something that's got great music and a great cover.
Oh yeah. No, that's actually how I found your record back in 1995. There was I don't remember the name of it, but in Northwest Portland in Oregon, there was a little tiny hole in the wall record store. And, you know, back when we had those, and I went in there, and actually yours was one of the featured albums, and it was the cover that intrigued me. And I did, it was one of those ones that actually had listening stations. You could actually sit there and listen, sample the album. Borders used to do that a lot too, but this was one of the early experiences of that. And I think actually Martini for Mancini was the first thing that caught me. I was like, it's the second song on the album. And I was like, I have to buy this. And I did. But yeah, the cover was part of what drew me in. Yeah, if you'd like me to start firing away, I've got.
Yeah, no,
definitely got a
please.
couple of
I'm
guys.
very curious as what do you want to know about me, man?
Well, let's see. First of all, I want to say, Cocktails with Joey is hands down my favorite album to come out of the
Thanks.
'90s scene. I've made this abundantly clear in our correspondence over the years. But the one of the things that I would say is that, one of the things that I've noticed about an observation I'll have is a lot of those records that come out of that period have aged differently. Some of them have aged very well. Some of them, there are tracks I still listen to, but there are some that did not. And one of the things that I think is going on there a little bit, and this is something that kind of occurred to me while I was listening to you guys talk on the 25th anniversary chat, is obviously when you're doing re-recording stuff from that era, you're always doing a little bit of a dance with kitsch, with irony, with all that stuff, right? There is something kind of comical about some of that music to come
Yeah,
out of that period.
it's playful music. A lot of
Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
And there's a line you walk when you record it, but one of the things that I think the ones that haven't succeeded, I'll bet you, I'd love to hear what you think of this. I'm guessing a lot of the ones that didn't succeed didn't embrace the history of that music the way you did. Because you actually went out and found the original musicians in many cases to work on your album that referenced that era. Am I right?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, something I had not really contemplated before, but I think a lot of it was, well, I found one of the original musicians who was a keystone musician in it, and that is Plas Johnson.
Yeah.
Okay, Plas Johnson is a tenor sax player. I'm going to just give a little edification here. Tenor sax player, plays all the saxes, but known as the tenor sax player of the Pink Panther theme original recording. That's his major thing that he's known for. Plus, tons and tons of recordings that people don't know that he's on. He was part of the Wrecking Crew. If anyone out there knows who the Wrecking Crew are, the studio musicians who were doing 2-3 sessions a day for TV, film, and music, Phil Spector records. I mean, he was on Eddie Cochran albums, Frank Zappa, Frank Sinatra, what else? Gene Vincent, I believe, Louie, the first recording long before the Kingsmen, Sarah Vaughan,
Wow.
Linda Ronstadt with the Nelson Riddle Orchestra, the Beach Boys' Pet Sound sessions. He's all over the place, all over, like Steely Dan. I mean, he's worked with such an array of people, but he was also on Les Baxter albums. He's on tons of stuff from back then on those lounge albums where they don't credit the musicians. And he's got a very identifiable sound. But when I made Cocktails with Joey, I thought, if I could get Plas Johnson on this would really completely bring it in, dial it right to being. Plas Johnson, just seemed to dial that album in and validate it in that, putting that stamp of approval. You've got the voice of those lounge albums and that era. So yeah, I mean, you do bring a good point to light. Here's what was going on in those albums in the 50s, 60s compared to the 90s. It was like most of the bands were just that. They were bands in the 90s. They were bands that got together with great enthusiasm and fun to make loungy music. All right, whatever version of lounge music that was. Okay, but I think what made my album stand apart is that my musicians were contracted, what you call yo-cats. A yo-cat is someone who's like a top call studio recording person, uh, musician who has what's like called, I call surgical precision in how they can read and play, and everything is like highly developed because otherwise, because the competition is so stiff to get studio work as a, you know, in a brass section in an orchestra, or albums where you have to blend, it's top pro stuff. There's no faking it, so there's no margin, you know what I mean,
Right.
for it's really top call stuff. So I assembled a group of people who are all uh the other element of this is I wrote out everything on a score pad. A score pad is a piece of paper that's got a music staff for each instrument on it, and they're all lined up from one measure to the next of like trumpet, saxophone, French horn, bass, organ, blah, blah, blah. So then you copy each individual part out page by page. So each person's got their part of the music, and then it all has to be played together in unity. So that's the bigger thing. None of us rehearsed as a band.
Wow.
I mean, sure, like me and the piano player Red Young, had done one movie score before. I hadn't done any gigs with him. I'd played a lot of gigs with Willie McNeil, but I mean, we came in there as a rhythm section, piano, bass, and drums, to do 3 songs in 3 hours, reading the music. And wherever there would be like a da 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 da, it was written in for him to go bop 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 bop, and he didn't know what was going to go on top of it.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Like neither did the piano player. If I wanted the piano player to like have a little answer accent or something after like something, I would write that in. I would indicate it in the music.
Well, this brings up an interesting question, because one of the fascinating things I learned in that 25th anniversary chat, that Zoom chat, was you initially, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but you initially recorded these 4 demo songs for Cocktails that became Cocktails with Joey as more of a calling card than maybe an entire album. Am I correct about this? At what point
Yeah.
did you realize that, oh, we might actually have something here that's more than just some demos to get film composing work?
Right. Okay. Yeah. The backstory with that was that, I'd done some work in film, and I worked quite a bit for a woman named Karen Rachtman, and she had supervised a lot of things like Quentin Tarantino's early films like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction and such. And, she'd done Dusk Till Dawn, Robert Rodriguez, and, she and we worked on our first film together. But anyways, one of the people that worked for her, Mary Ramos, who then went on years later on her own, and Tarantino went with her for even the most current ones. I saw her name right up in the front on the latest, Tarantino film. But anyway, like Mary Ramos said, Joey, there's no competition in people that want people are wanting lounge music in films now. And the only other person who are getting those jobs is Combustible Edison, the band that like really helped instigate that whole lounge resurgence and make a splash. And long before Pink Martini, I believe, I think they were around a long time ago, like before Pink Martini, which they, for one thing, Pink Martini went on to like really do wonderful things in their career and really like build a wonderful industry for themselves.
Oh
But what
yeah.
happened with me was Mary Ramos said, look, Joey, you do music for film and you're talented and you have a love of all this kind of eclectic music and you're a record collector. If you were to do some of this music, you could probably get work in here because there's no competition. It's all going to Combustible Edison. There's no one else. And so I went and made 3 songs and I brought them back. And I don't know that it got me more. I don't know why I made another 3 songs, but I did. And the method in which I did these, I said we recorded the rhythm section was a 3-hour time slot for 3 songs. So we have an hour to figure out, like, to get really like nice unified performance of each song. And then I would hire one trumpeter who would come in for 3 hours to put the trumpets on the 3 songs, and one sax to play alto, tenor, and baritone sax. 3-hour session to do the saxophones on those 3 songs. Everything was composed. All the parts were copied out. Everything was ready to go. I don't know how I ended up making or why I made a second batch of 3. I think that they were well received by Mary or Karen or something. And so I went back and I made a few more. But it was not intended to be an album. I had 6 songs. They were just like calling cards. They were not so much calling cards as much as they were also served as 2 functions. One was a calling card to get more work, but the other one was I could license those like library, like my own private library.
Right.
And so, when you're in the ecosystem for a long time of, a city that you've been in for a long time and you're part of the nightlife, you end up meeting people by year by year by year, more and more and more people, right? People come and go from club scenes. They're new faces on the scene because they're young and they're of age to go to clubs, or now they're of a certain age where they've got kids' careers and mortgages, so they're not in the clubs anymore. You know what I mean? It's a flux, constant flux. But anyway, one of the guys that I knew who was a restaurateur, and I was eating at his restaurant, and he was an entrepreneur. He still is, and he was also in music and had a band, and said, I bought into a label in Seattle, an independent label, and we're doing, Seattle type of indie rock, but we want to do a lounge album because he saw the trend. He had his finger on the pulse, like something like that would probably do well. And he said, you got anything like that? And so it's kind of like, when they say it's all about who you know.
Oh yeah.
It was one of those instances about, it's all about who you know, in that regards of like, not only that, but a lot of people you hang out with when you're in your 20s, now you're in your 30s, and they're no longer, they're actually like a film director or commercial photographer, or they actually had a career and they remembered you, and now they want to use you because of the quality of your work, but also because you have a friendship that goes back a long time. So it all kind of coagulated in that sense. And that's how I went home and I made the other 6 songs.
I remember finding that whole scene really validating. It hit me at the right moment. I was like, in my early to mid 20s. And I remember that scene being revalidating because particularly as someone who liked film music, I've always had a very cinematic relationship with music. I always like to spend it thinking about scenes that I would film or in my head or draw. And one of the interesting things about that music is it really had a very cinematic aspect to it. But also, it also validated some of my own taste in the sense that, like, I think before that, I liked Frank Sinatra, but I think I always liked the Nelson Riddle era Frank Sinatra better than the rest. But I think there was probably a time when a music snob would have gone, well, you should really like the Count Basie stuff best because Nelson Riddle's very cartoony. And I was like, this whole musical scene arrived that sort of like was like my love of Nelson Riddle made into a scene in a cultural moment.
It does.
Let's see. Let me go through my questions. Okay, here we go. you also have you're in the soundtrack to the film Swingers, and I was watching that again the other day because it just came up on HBO Max, and I was like, it holds up beautifully, the movie, and reminded me of a number of my own embarrassing behaviors as an
Yeah.
But one of the things about did you know that movie and that score would take off like it did?
Had no idea. In fact, like I really kind of wasn't aware of it. I actually didn't like the film when it came out. You know why?
Wow.
Because it reminded me of the type of people that I don't like in Hollywood.
Yeah, fair enough.
It totally did. It totally reminded me of these kinds of dudes that I really think are like just kind of tools. That's how well it was done, actually. That's how well it was written and how well it was acted. The whole thing was that actually I bought it. That's how much I bought it. You know what I mean? That I actually didn't like the movie.
You had a really interesting answer to a question in that 25th anniversary chat. That was, so I asked you, what do you think caused the swing lounge revival in the 90s? And my whole thing was, where did it intersect with the grunge alt rock movement that was happening around the time? Certainly, as I mentioned during the chat, I think also in the 80s I had seen what happened with Kid Creole and the Coconuts, and I felt like that was almost like a 10 year or earlier precursor of sort of
Kind of was, yeah.
But you tied it into punk,
Yeah.
which I thought was really interesting. What was that? How do you see that all happening?
I tied it into punk because like punks were thrift shoppers. We're talking punks from the late 70s onwards. Late 70s through 80s were all thrift shoppers. They bought their clothes at thrift shops. They liked cool collectibles and things that were found in thrift shops. And what punk did from, let's talk about like 1977 onwards,
Yeah.
was once punk had a few years behind it by 1980, 1981, then we were starting, then it became something that was very, very, what would we call very experimental music. There was no uniform on it. The first punk bands in LA anyways, they were all different sounding bands.
Mhm.
There was no uniform. It wasn't like hardcore mosh pit, like cookie cutter type of formatted music. But like by the early 80s, everyone was free to like experiment even further. Like Chili Peppers, like they were taking like funk bass and putting it in with punk energy and lyrics and performance. There were a lot of performance art kind of bands mixing and matching, and so they were and what happened too at the same time, rockabilly revival by 1980, 81. Also ska revival from the two-tone era, which was an outgrowth of punk. So you had all these revivals of other genres and going on. And so people were buying records in thrift shops, and people who are punks are also, a lot of times, they're cheeky people with very fun personalities and very cheeky and very witty and real smart asses and intelligent people who read lots of books, very cultured, or even if they don't read lots of books, they know about the cultural references of literature and art and film and music. So they're finding these albums in thrift shops that were like Les Baxter and Arthur Lyman albums and Esquivel and whatever, like, experiment in sound, stereophonic records by Enoch Light and these kinds of things. And finding that like there was almost a weird, almost a perverse, psychedelic, kitschy aspect about the whole thing, you know?
It's
And so
funny.
like it was almost a celebration of how kind of dorky it was, right?
Well, yeah. The one thing I've been watching lately, a lot of '60s, late '60s stuff. Our Man Flint.
Yeah.
Been watching, I think early James Bond, and one of the things that really strikes me about all the films of that age, which are all around the same time, you're starting to see all that stuff, is there's this almost dorky, but it seems dorky now, but there's this kind of jet age optimism. They're just like, all this new technology is great.
Yeah, no, seriously, right? All the gadgets and the,
Yeah.
James Bond has all the gadgets, and then things like James Bond, I think set the bar and created the template for then the spy movie trend, because everyone then jumped out onto spy films, I think, because of James Bond. Well, also because the Cold War, because there were dramas about, the Cold War from the 50s and early 60s. But really, I think James Bond brought it into that espionage, glamorization of espionage with all the gadgetry and things. And then, of course, Austin Powers referred directly to so many of those films, like direct references. And so people that don't know the films, that are younger, that see Austin Powers, they think it's almost I can't even explain it. It almost waters down how good those old films are, because they only see that it's almost, they also don't get how deep the parody aspect is, because they don't have a reference point, right?
Yeah. One of the things that are there any great? It sounds like you didn't have a lot of time to make the songs, like an hour a song, basically for the basic laydown, and then time on top of that. And were you paying for this out of your own pocket?
Yeah, I was paying for the recording studio fee, but I had all the people involved volunteered their time up front and said, like, I'm making these demos. If you say no, I totally understand, but here's what I'm doing. Wondered if you'd help me out, if you'd want to do this with me. And then when I got the record deal, I said, look, they want me to finish it, so I'll actually get money to pay everybody. So that's kind of how it worked out. And I remember your question was like, how long did it take to record, right?
Yes. Yeah. How long did it take?
86 and a half hours to record and mix the entire thing.
Oh my God. How
So
many?
86 or
86 and a half
86 and a
hours.
half hours. So
Basically did the whole thing in basically 2 weeks. I mean, that's
yeah, if you were to do it, like if you were to go in front to back, yeah, it would have been 2 solid weeks or so. That's to mix the whole thing too. Each song probably took an average of an hour or so to mix. And for people that don't know what mixing is, we've got a tape that's got 24 tracks on it of layers, and we've got a console where you can mix each volume of each instrument to blend the whole orchestra together, and then it gets recorded down to a stereo, smaller, like 1/4-inch size tape. That's how we did it back then.
Are there any unused tracks or demos? It doesn't sound like there are in the Cocktails with Joy experience.
No, you had asked me that. No, because here's the interesting thing. I wrote 3 songs, then I wrote another 3 songs, then I wrote 6 songs. And each one of these, I was designing this like, if I was to make an album, here's like what song 1, song 2, song 3 would sound like on like side A of a record, or the beginning of a CD would be this kind of song, then this kind of song, and then that kind of song, like this type of tempo, this kind of rhythmic feel, this kind of tonality, major or minor, or like you listen to pop records and like the ballad is always the 3rd song in on a Beatles album, for example. You get a couple bangers, then you get the ballad, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So like, what's interesting is that I wrote the next 3 songs like, okay, what would happen next on a good album? These types of songs would happen. So it's not like there's 5 big reels of tape or something. I've made albums where like 8 or 10 master reels with lots of takes of the same song. There are only 2 reels of tape, and the reel 1 contains songs 1 through 6, and reel 2 contains songs 7 through 12.
Oh man.
And they're all in sequence of how you hear them on the CD, which is pretty cool. Very economical. But, there I was wondering like, yeah, I mean, I really needed to go in. And this is like my mentality of being trained to be a film composer. It's like you're working on a fixed budget. Usually you're working on a budget for a film company and there is a deadline that has to be hit. So we're not doing 7 takes of something and choosing the best one. We're going to like lose that one. We're going to go for another. And then, okay, we got it. Okay, that's in the can. Let's move on to the next scene of this little thing we have to do for the next scene. Ready? Everyone get out your paper for like the third part or whatever in the film. That was how I was trained. So it's like, okay, today we're doing these 3 songs. We're going to spend an hour on each one. And that's how good the guys are.
I've mentioned how I feel like, and certainly this has been my experience of using the album over the years when I'm working. Joey's Cocktails with Joey feels like it's a soundtrack to a movie a little bit. It has a soundtrack quality to it. And certainly songs on that have been my private theme in my head for various comics I've done. One of the things is if Cocktails with Joey was the soundtrack to a film, if you were thinking of that way, what kind of movie are we talking about here?
It would probably be a Blake Edwards film.
Yeah.
Right? Blake Edwards like made The Party. He made Pink Panther. I mean, he was the director of the Peter Gunn TV series.
That actually segues into one of my questions, which is I wanted to talk about the afterlife of the album. So having discovered it at the time of its release, it would be amusing to me over the years when I would hear bits of it pop up in places. So for example, the most obvious one I could think of is there was some scene in, I remember, Sex and the City years later, and the Sex and the City cast is talking in some New York nightclub, and
first season.
I heard a Martini from Mancini in the background.
Oh yeah,
and I was like, oh hey, yeah, I know that. Are there any other? Because I think that album strikes me as having had kind of an interesting cultural footnote in that way, where it sort of turns up in the background of stuff. What have been some of the interesting places that it's turned up in the media for you?
I'll tell you the most interesting for me, and the one that I think I'm probably most proud of is NPR, like fresh air, all things considered type of things where it's used as a bumper. It still is.
Oh, wow.
It's like in their rotation of library choices is bumpers. It's like, you couldn't flatter me more of like, because that is such quality work that they do. And it's like, oh, that's really cool that they chose something I did, that's a feel good thing for the work you do,
one of the things that I love, so I'm a big fan of Stevie Wonder, 70s Stevie Wonder. I love funk, 70s funk, and Stevie Wonder. When he's left the Berry Gordy system, but now he's like taking all the chops that he developed in that, and he's like doing these incredibly dense albums. One of the things I love about Stevie Wonder songs is that you'll have a big hook, and this to me ties in a bit with the appeal of Cocktails with Joey. You've got this album that's got this big easy hook that you can really enjoy, but the deeper you go into the song with a great Stevie Wonder track, the more complexity you'll find hidden inside, like the notes. Like he'll have put some very complex little thing inside his pop song. And one of the things I feel like one of the reasons Cocktails with Joey has endured is because it provides some of the same reward. You can kind of drill down into these songs that have these hooks, and you'll find a lot of nutrition in there. Does that make sense? Again, I don't have a musical education, so.
Well, I mean, I couldn't ask for a nicer compliment. That's going up there in like top 5 compliments of my life, being like compared to Stevie Wonder. I mean, honestly, like, thank you, first of all. And my answer is that, yeah, I mean, what you do, there's a very, very apt way to describe what you're talking about, because as you're going in, you're seeing more and more counterpoint of other instruments playing filigree or ornamentation or dense harmonic areas, or what we call different, say, contrary motion where one thing is ascending while the other is descending, or one's or vice versa. So, you're getting this very much organic breath and or sophisticated harmony that's not just 1 3 5, like you hear like strum along to a Beach Boys song. Well, sorry, wrong example, because they have lots of sophistication in their harmonies, but I'm saying, like, what I'm saying.
Yeah,
It does have a lot of sophistication, going back to a lot of the jazz education and information of, like, what kind of chord voicings are a jazz musician using. As you go, you're listening and you're noticing other things that aren't in your face going on in, like, the left side of the speaker somewhere, or
right.
there's layers to it. Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a lot of what has made it such a re-listenable album for me over the years, is just that there is a lot of, like, nutrition in the album. You can drill down into it and find stuff to enjoy. Okay, last question about for today. Thank you so much for all your time, by the way. I really appreciate your generosity. What are you doing nowadays? Like, where is your musical life today? I know you've moved. So what kind of musical work are you doing now? I know you do some DJing.
It's interesting. I've been working remotely for years. So COVID, as far as a different way to work, hasn't changed anything, fortunately for me. But what I'm doing, well, first of all, I made an album in 1999 with a Cuban singer who was a jazz singer, but he put Cuban rhythms and jazz together from the 40s and 50s. He was part of this whole movement in Cuba. That was what gave birth and created the whole, like, group, nucleus of people in Cuba that created what we call Latin jazz, Afro-Cuban jazz. His name was El Gran Feove, and he expatriated to Mexico City in 1955, and he had not made an album since 1979. And I went and I found him in 1999, and I made an album with him. And Matt Dillon started making a documentary about him. And both of those kind of things kind of got backburnered for a long time for lots of different reasons.
Sure.
But in the past 7 years, Matt Dillon has been editing and finishing the film, and it came out beautiful. And honestly, like, what's going on now is that just premiered at the San Sebastian Film Festival in Spain a couple months ago in late September. And there's just negotiations going on of, like, the, like, when and who aspect of the platforms that the album and the film will be released at. And so right now everyone's in a holding pattern right now because of COVID. So the industry, this is going to be like I'm so excited about this project because this man was, like, enigmatic. Okay. I mean, if you go to my blog, you will see, on my website, which is joeyaltruda.com. By the way, what do they say? Subscribe, and comment. Like, subscribe, and comment, folks, on this YouTube video if you like it. But anyway, go to joeyaltruda.com to the blogs, and you're going to hear, like, see, I just published my third installation about the backstory of the album and finding the guy's record, because Matt Dillon and I are friends since 1994, when I was actually making cocktails with Joey. And, I guess what I wanted to say was, like, we've been record collectors together for all these years, collecting especially music of Cuban influence. So, when he found the music of Feove in Cuba, and he made a tape of it for me, and we were both just blown away by it. And so that's my latest thing. And also I just recently produced a song by Tom Zay. Are you familiar with Tom Zay?
I'm not.
Oh, then you are in for a treat, my friend. All right. Tom Zay is a musical genius, another enigma of music, who's had a recording career of 53 years now. He's been recording since 1967. He was one of the main people of the Tropicalia movement in Brazil. I mean, people like Gilberto Gil and Caetano Veloso and, Gal Costa, these main figureheads of the music. Novos Baianos is another, they all look to Tom Zay as like, he's a little bit older than they are, but like he's 84 now. But anyways, we made a ska track together.
Oh, wow.
And I was able to collaborate with Tom Zay. Like he sent me basically his Pro Tools session with his voice on it. I told him which song of his I'd like to cover it as a ska. And I also made a very cool reggae version of it. So this will be released digitally sometime probably in the early part of the year to come. And then with plans of pressing a 45 that will be like a pre-ordered, item. And so what I'm doing now is I'm doing a lot of planning on doing a lot of releases that will be released almost like a private record club. That it will be like a private pressing of particular releases, that there will be a wait list. And when I reach the quota that makes it worth manufacturing, then everyone will be notified. They pay in advance, and then it's sent out as one batch. It's not like me driving my car down to the post office every other day to sell a record. You know what I mean? I've got a system basically in mind of, most artists have a real issue with the digital platforms, and for the right reasons, of like really bad compensation. But what the digital platforms provide is free global awareness of your thing, and where you're going to make your real money is the tangible version of that product. So if you have a following that will buy a record, that's where your real money's going to be made, because people are spending money on records.
Yeah, the vinyl's been rediscovered.
It has
interesting.
It has greatly. And
So that's the story of your career a lot, is you'll find an artist that you were obsessed with, and then you'll end up collaborating with them. That's happened to you numerous times in your life.
Yeah.
It's got to be, is there ever like a nerd out moment where you're just like kind of having trouble keeping it together when you first hear from this person? Or have you've been around the block, so maybe that doesn't happen to you?
Yeah, no, not really. I never really had that. I got to work with Mongo Santa Maria once though, and I had a lot of kind of shyness because I just don't know like what to say to him, because like he's the god. He's like a god of 20th century percussion. He's Mongo, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's just such a sweet guy, or like you just can't come up with any questions to ask him. Like you know what I mean? You wish you could just like think of like more and more things to ask him about.
There are certain comic artists like that for me too, where I'm just paralyzed with sort of awe, like, oh my God.
Yeah. So, it's been a fulfilling career so far. And honestly, like, yeah, I think a lot of the times, well, I had no idea I would be working with a lot of the people. It's almost like it's a certain aspect of manifestation about how you could be in touch with what you want to do in your life. And maybe you don't say, I'm going to work with that person, and it happens. Sometimes it does, but like you're keyed into what you want to do in your life. Like, I didn't get to work with Art Blakey, but I got to work with Tom Zay. You know what I mean? These kinds of experiences was like, and it all came from music loving and music collecting. That's the fascinating aspect of it. Really.
While we're doing plugs too, we should do a plug for you've just released not one but two Christmas albums.
Yes.
Price.
Yes. So yeah,
Really
that means I don't know whether I'm going to be broadcasting this by that time, but I'll plug it anyways. Yes, the Plaz Johnson Christmas in Hollywood is available through joeyaltruda.com. There's a button for it. Plus you get a free live performance recording of me doing all the music from the Charlie Brown Christmas special.
Which is dynamite, by the way. Thoroughly enjoying that. I bought it myself the other day and I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And there's going to be a Christmas mix, DJ mix to come also. Watch out for the emails, kids. And I've got the second half of the Cocktails with Joey 25th anniversary memorabilia pack. There's 30 ready to go for like the holiday season. So,
great.
Like, follow, and share. That's how it goes, isn't it? Like, follow, share, and comment, but make the comments nice. And don't get into fights with strangers that have no authority to speak on the topic. Oh, well, then where would YouTube be?
Yeah, right.
Well, hey, Mike.
I'm already looking forward when you post this.
I'm going to stop the recording now, but stay on with me for a minute. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and see you on the flip side. Ciao for now.